Hello, thank you for joining me. Our Gospel reading this Sunday tells the story of the two disciples journeying from Jerusalem to Emmaus on the evening of the first Easter Sunday. And I thought that rather than me talking about it, you might like to hear the story told by one of them in his own words. So here we go. I can't believe I can have been so blind, to have been so close to the greatest event in history and so close to missing it completely. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. It's difficult to put the pieces of the last few days together. My name is Cleopas. As you may have heard, I played a very small part in the story. But I'd like to tell you a little more. How I came so close to making sure that even that would be forgotten forever. I did know Jesus, though I wasn't one of the 12, the core team. But I was with him for most of his ministry. And I knew about the sham trial and his crucifixion, of course, we all did. My wife Mary even stood with his mother and some of the other women at the foot of the cross. Too dangerous for us men to stay, though. Even the Romans wouldn't crucify women. But they certainly weren't above putting to death any of the men that they suspected of being collaborators, if they thought we were up to no good. So we stayed out of the way. Even Simon Peter denied knowing him and ran off. And of course, we were still hoping for some sort of miracle. There was a story that they'd tried to stone him to death once before, but he just walked through them, got clean away. And if he really was the Son of God, wouldn't God have sent every angel in heaven down to save him, put the Romans in their place? There was some sort of an earthquake, and we thought or hoped that might have been it. But when Mary found me afterwards, she said that by then he was already dead. The soldiers even stuck a spear in him to be sure. She said it was as if the very earth had shuddered as he died. So there I was with a friend on the road. I used to enjoy travelling around with Jesus, but now it seemed that our journey had come to a very sad and a very final end. Things had quieted down in Jerusalem a bit by that morning, third day after he was crucified. But then Mary came back with a story that the tomb had been opened and the body was gone. Well, you can imagine the stir that caused. And it didn't take long before it got the attention of the authorities. Suddenly, Jerusalem didn't seem such a healthy place to be. So we got out. We were on our way home to Emmaus. Now, once we'd left the initial panic behind, it became a pretty depressing journey. And for a while, I guess we weren't much inclined to talk. But we must each have been mulling over what had happened. So much of it in that last week since he rode into Jerusalem on that blasted donkey. And it was inevitable that sooner or later one of us would try to put it into words. Now, it's about 7 miles from Jerusalem to Emmaus, so we had plenty of time to chew it all over, though I don't think we were getting any closer to making any sense of it. And we must have got fairly deep engrossed in conversation, because suddenly we realised that there was someone else, a stranger, walking beside us. Gave us quite a scare, I can tell you. You see, we weren't quite sure how long he'd been there, or what he might have heard, or whether he might have been one of the high priest's spies. But he just asked us what we were talking about so intently. We couldn't believe it. He was coming from Jerusalem, but he seemed to know nothing about all that had been happening there for the last week. Not Jesus' triumphant entry, not the trial, not his crucifixion, and not the body going missing from the tomb. And when we told him how all we'd hoped for of Jesus had been dashed, he just laughed said how foolish we were, how slow to understand all we read in the prophets. Cheek of him. Him who knew nothing about what happened last week, accusing us of being slow to understand Scripture. For 2 pins I'd have left him there where he was on the road. But he seemed to be going our way, so we had little choice but to go on walking with him and hear him out. It was as if he knew every word the prophets ever wrote. And starting all the way back with Moses, he explained everything they'd written about Jesus. Now, they couldn't really have been writing it about Jesus, not directly. But somehow it all fitted the facts, exactly as we knew them. And the way he explained it, it didn't just fit. Somehow it all started to make sense, even that he had to suffer and die. And I can hardly describe how it made me feel. Our heads told us that it was all over, that none of it mattered anymore, he was gone. But our hearts were burning inside us as if some joy, more intense than anything we'd ever experienced before, was welling up, trying to get out. Well, as he finished, we realized that we'd reached the village. This is the really scary part. He made as if to go on. It would have been so easy to let him. It had been a long day and we were tired. We weren't sure how much food there would be in the home. And not really being sure who he was or who he knew, we weren't sure we wanted him to find out where we lived. But our hearts were still burning and somehow told us that we could not, we must not let him go yet. So we pressed him to stay, have a meal at least. And so we went in and we sat down at table. And then he did the strangest thing. We were the hosts. He was the guest. But he was the one who picked up the bread and blessed it and broke it and offered it to us. And suddenly it was as if our hearts did burst inside us. Because there was Jesus sitting at our table, breaking bread, just as he had done before he died. And no sooner did we recognize him than he was gone. I don't know how. All I know is 1 minute he was there in front of us and the next he wasn't. You try and explain it if you want. I know what I saw. But that's not the thing that really scares me. The thing that makes me shudder in every fibre of my being when I think about it is that I met the risen Jesus and I might never have known. If we hadn't listened to him as we walked together on the road, if we hadn't insisted that he join us for a meal, he'd have passed us by. We'd have lost him, maybe forever. And somehow, I think that's the way it's always going to be now. Whatever he was before, since he came back that day, he isn't the same. Maybe that's how I, who thought I knew him so well, didn't recognize him. Before, he taught just a few of us. From now on, he speaks to the whole world. And we have to be ready to hear his voice in the voices of strangers, to welcome him into our homes and our hearts and our lives in the bodies of strangers. Didn't he tell us that whatever we do for the least of his brothers and sisters, we do for him? And we have to be ready to tell others what he speaks to us, like I'm doing here today. We might never see him again like we did that day. But I know our lives will never be the same again. And whenever we seek him in the breaking of bread, we will find him. Easter doesn't end at sunset on that first Sunday. Easter is the rest of our lives. Thank you for listening, and look out for that burning feeling in your chest. Shalom, God's peace.